Thanks everyone for being here today. Let me ask you some questions first. How many of you are librarians? A lot. How many are managers? Okay. How many assistant directors and directors? Awesome. Great. Thank you all for being here. It takes every single one of us to make projects like this work. So super excited to talk with you. What we're going to do today, I'm going to start with Columbus Dispatch Digital, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura Simons to talk about the stats part of what we've done with this project. And then Aaron O'Donovan will talk about some of our small and minority press projects that we've been working on. And then we'll wrap up with some of the Columbus Dispatch archives work that we've been doing as well. So we're going to take you from the digitized historical newspapers kind of backwards in time to the hard copy and microfilm papers as well. And then we'll do questions in between and tours at the end. So let me tell you a little bit about the Columbus Dispatch Digital that we've had here for a while. So here at the Columbus Metropolitan Library, we've really gone all in on collecting our local newspapers. They're one of our most used local history and genealogy resources. We literally use them every single hour of every day for every question, just about. And they're a part of our community that we believe is too important to lose. With a lot of the changes that are happening in media across the country right now, there are sometimes, at least in our community, not any other home for some of these newspapers. You'll hear about that later. So for us, this means collecting in multiple formats, which originally, when we first started having these conversations, goes against everything we're taught in library school. I know, I get it. I feel you if you're thinking that at the moment, but let me try to tell you why today as well. So I'm going to focus primarily in my remarks on the Columbus Dispatch, which is not the oldest paper in Columbus history, but the one major paper that survives today. In 1985, it became the sole major newspaper in the city when the Columbus Citizen Journal ceased publication. So it's been the paper of record, if not the paper of record, for over a century and one of the most significant resources for Columbus history. So that's part of the reason why we collect in multiple formats as well. Some of those include what you see on the screen here. We've got some more shots. Microfilm is available in the cabinets you see on the side there, which is accessible here on the third floor of Main Library. And we have it on hard copy. We'll talk more about that. It's a little scary sometimes, but we do have it on hard copy, primarily because we found, as many of you, if you have microfilm collections, the microfilm is not always perfect. There are pages missing, there's overexposures, underexposures, one page is torn out or part of a page is torn out. So we do keep that hard copy with the hopes of eventually maybe someday going back and exchanging some of those pages on the film or digital. And that's a decision we've made, again, because there's no other hard copy or no other copy, period, of this newspaper, and it's so important to the work that we do. So we can talk about that more as well. And then the Columbus Dispatch Digital, which is what we're going to talk about mostly today. So we purchased the digitized issues from 1871 to 1985 back in 2018. We're hoping to purchase additional years as the time goes on. The images that you see around the room on the banners are taken from the Dispatch Digital, so you can see that users get the full image of the newspaper, giving them access to all the articles, ads, classifieds, etc. And they also get that context on the page. So not only are you just getting the article itself, but you see what else is happening that day, which I think is sometimes really interesting, but also important for research as well. So for post-1985 materials, we have text-only access at the moment, which isn't as great because it misses some of the articles. Obituaries in particular, we find are not always there, and doesn't have the ads or the context of the full page. And you'll see why that's going to be important here as well. So what can we use this for? I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here, but let me give you some words that you can take back when you have these conversations about why you should purchase a digitized historical newspaper database or do something like this on your own. So you can see a variety of things on the slide here. Pretty much any question that we get, the dispatch comes into play at some point, whether that's the first place we look or happens further down in the process, we almost always use it. So genealogy and obituaries. This is the obituary here for the Reverend James Poindexter, who was the pastor at Second Baptist Church here in Columbus from 1862 to 1893 and was elected our first black city council member in 1880, which I think is really cool. We also use it for house and property histories. Because it's a full-text searchable database, we can search the specific addresses. So at the bottom here, you're seeing the first entry for 96 South Grand Avenue. For those of you who Ubered, you'll know that's where you are at the moment. And it's an ad for childcare. This at one point was the Noah Swain Mansion, and apparently Noah Swain and his family needed a nurse. So great if you're trying to find out the first of something or who lived in a particular house or what just in general the history of a property is. So lots of different uses here. Let me talk about how this worked before we had the Dispatch Digital, because this is really what makes the difference for us. So we've got some sample searches on here. I just kind of want to go through how we would do this work before and how we do it today, and I think you'll come to understand pretty quickly why this has been a game changer for us. So for the first one, the obituary for author James Grover Thurber, pretty straightforward. We know when Thurber died. That's a picture of him with his dog there. If you've read James Thurber, you know he's all about dogs. So we know when he died, pretty simple. We can load the microfilm for that date. Maybe you have to go the day or two after, but we can pull that obit, print it out on the microfilm machine, scan it, whatever, and get it to the library customer pretty quickly. So that one's okay. For the next one, what business was at 3000 Hayden Road? We would have likely started with city directories, and we probably would still do that, but what we get with the full-text searchable Dispatch Digital is even more than that. We can type in that address, not only find what businesses was there, but we're also going to get advertisements. So if it, not in this case, but if it was a store, you're going to get all of their ads over the years. You're going to see how that changed. You'll see if there was anything else in the newspaper about them. So you really just get a much deeper and richer kind of set of information. We could not have done this before this full-text searchable, because you would have had to know the exact date that this business was in the newspaper. Impossible to know, right? Unless there was a big event you knew you could search around. So the next one, the newspaper article about Mamie Moore, is a little more complicated as well. Mamie Moore, just a little bit of background about her because I think it's a great story. She lived from 1895 to 1978 and was affectionately known as the mother of the Columbus branch of the NAACP. She worked with the Urban League, the YMCA, PTA, Boys and Girls Clubs. You get the idea here. She was pretty much involved in everything. And she also, as a civil rights activist, was alongside Dr. Martin Luther King when he gave his I Have a Dream speech. So really a super important person in Columbus history and involved in everything from the 20th century. Pretty much everything you can imagine, she's going to be there. So someone wants to find an article about Mamie Moore. There are thousands of them around which topic, which date, what are you looking for? Do you want just general information about her? You know, you all can do the reference interview in your head. You know how that goes. In the past, we would have had to figure out very, very specifically what that customer is looking for to be able to even have a chance at going to the microfilm, browsing around, trying to find the article. Now we can do some clever searching, which I'll show you a little bit of, and we can get to that pretty quickly. So that really has been a game changer for us as well. Some of these things where we would have probably had to say we just can't do before, we're able to do now. Another common one, before I show you the last example there, is I personally was this isn't true, but if it was, I was in the newspaper when I was in 4th grade for my soccer team. You know, the only thing I can give you, if that's your question before this, is let's sit you down on a microfilm machine and you can browse the entire year of your 4th grade time and see if you can find that picture, that article of yourself. So that's another great example. Let me talk about the last one here. A common request we've gotten in the last few years, you can understand why, is more information about the 1918 flu pandemic. Kind of the same process here. We know that from the spring of 1918 through the spring of 1919, the pandemic caused more than 550,000 deaths in the United States. But when would we look on the microfilm for articles here in Columbus? Before, it was a lot of educated guessing and browsing, kind of things we know from histories and elsewhere about maybe when it might have been worse here in Columbus, what was happening. But it was still a lot of pretty much putting someone on a microfilm machine and saying, "We wish you luck," which is not what we like to do here. So now, however, we can answer that question very easily. We cannot use the words 1918 flu pandemic, and I'll explain why that is as well. But really, at least we're able to help folks now. So let me tell you a little bit about the way the searching works on this. So it uses optical character recognition, or OCR, for those of you that are familiar. And it does not have any article segmentation or keyword search capability. So oftentimes the mistake folks will make is thinking they can type in things like 1918 flu pandemic, which was not what they called it in 1918. That's what we call it today, right? And then so you're not going to find that anywhere in the newspaper. So you're going to have to think about words that made sense at the time. So let me say a little bit more about the imaging here. Images are scanned bitonally, which is not great for photographs. You'll see how some of the photographs come out, but does make the OCR much, much better. So you've got that advantage there. So all in all, the OCR is pretty good. It helps as well that the nature of journalism is to repeat information. So even if the OCR has missed a word, maybe in one part of the article, you're likely to find it somewhere else. So that makes a big difference for the OCR as well. Again, remember that we're searching full text here, so we need to think like we're reading the newspaper at the time, which is this whole kind of shift you have to make in your head, to take away our 2024 language and step back to whatever year that you're using. So historical terms that may have been applied later, think about World War II or even Watergate. Watergate was just a hotel for a very long time, right? Are terms that were applied after the fact. So those are not going to work as searches. You've got an example. If you can see this, I know it's kind of small, but we were doing some research the other day trying to determine when actually the first gay pride parade was here in Columbus. You'd think we would know this, but there's some controversy. That's a longer story. So you can see that we limited by date here, since in an earlier time, the words gay and pride meant something totally different than they mean today. So it didn't make any sense to have that search show up earlier. And in this case, we had to experiment with several different search terms, as you can imagine, to be able to complete the research. This also gets into some challenges just around language in general, and explaining to customers that the language for something like a gay pride parade in 1970 is not going to be language that we would use today. There's going to be a lot of derogatory words that are used, and the only way to find them is to type those words. So that is something we work with folks on, and it can cause some challenging conversations, but it is kind of stepping into that historical thinking box and really being able to make that work for you. So just real quickly, in addition to the proximity, did we do proximity searching? I didn't. Let me tell you a little bit about that real quick. There is a proximity search Did I put that up there? Where you can do near, the word near really makes a difference. So in this case, we did gay near to pride. So those two words have to be within 2 words of each other. Otherwise, you get all kinds of gazillions of results that aren't going to help you as much. So in addition to proximity searching, of course, there's Boolean operators that you really need to use for a lot of general terms. The example I have here is we've had some controversy around the Christopher Columbus statue. Our city, of course, was named after Christopher Columbus. And the statue was in front of City Hall here from 1955 to 2020. It was removed at that time. And so when that was happening, we were trying to figure out the history of it, how this came to be, that we had a very large, I think he was like 50 feet tall or something, statue of Columbus here in our city. And so searching Columbus statue by itself, every page of the Columbus Dispatch has the word Columbus on it. So not super helpful, right? You get like 15 million results. So we just used Columbus and statue to kind of connect those words a little bit. So we were seeing both there. Still, again, we had to fiddle with it a little bit, but we got where we needed to be, which is that they installed the statue in 1955 as a gift from Genoa, Italy. So, and I can tell you more about that whole story if you are interested as well. Finally, one of the great resources that our customers love is just the ability to email, print, download, all the things that your folks are asking for as well, because it just makes it easier for them to do their research. We find we have hobbyist researchers, we have academic researchers. We can sit students down with this and they can just go to town on it in a way that, before when we would kind of point them to the microfilm machines, they gave us that look, that they're humoring us, but they're not really going to sit there, right? So that's happened before. So it's just been really great for anyone in the community. It's easy to use. We get a lot of questions about why all of our newspapers are not available in this way. I think we're starting to see, I would hypothesize, more of an expectation that everything is digitized, and if it's not digitized, what's the problem? And we all know that it takes time and money and all those things. But I think we're seeing that more with customers as to what else is going on. And then we see questions about why we have the 1985 cutoff for the full text newspapers, and that's just we haven't purchased the rest, so that's a conversation that we have as well. Overall, like I said at the beginning of my remarks, we really use this multiple times every hour. I myself use it multiple times every day for just about any question that comes up that we can help our users with. So you're probably wondering what that looks like in terms of actual stats and numbers. So I'm going to introduce Laura Simons, who is our Director of Collection Services, who's going to give you a little bit about our usage stats.
So as Angela said, I'm the head of collection services, and so my team makes the decisions about what resources we buy. We have a budget for premium resources, and as we started to talk about purchasing the historical archive of the Dispatch, Angela and her team were huge proponents of this. As you can see, it's... Sure. Absolutely. Angela and her team were big proponents of buying this, and you can see how much they use it in their work. And because it's the paper of record for our community, we felt that it was really important. But it's also a capital investment for us. We're talking about millions of scanned pages, and so there was a cost associated with that. So we did a lot of research into how other libraries used it, how much usage they were getting, and frankly, some of the numbers they shared, we thought that can't be right. And yet, we have these numbers. So we had over 500,000 uses in the first full year that we had the Dispatch. We bought it in late 2018 through late 2019, over 500,000 accesses, and over 1.1 million in the first 2 years. Then we got into the pandemic, and I feel like 2020 numbers, that just means Angela and her team were really, really, really busy. Because they were one of the services that we could do remotely and they could do research. So usage has dropped a little bit. It is starting to come back up, but that's really indicative of what we're seeing with all of our resources. Nothing is is skyrocketing anymore. But we also not only look at actual usage, which we're thrilled with, because this is consistently our highest usage database. I think we're over 2 million at this point, 2.2. My team's also really interested in cost per use because we review every year. What do we subscribe to? Does it still make sense? This obviously is a long-term purchase, but we want to be sure that we're promoting it in the right ways and getting the usage we want. And so we started at around $5.89 a use in that first year. It's consistently dropped since then. We're currently at 42 cents every time we access it, and every time we use it, that cost drops. And with the kind of usage, 300,000 plus visits a year, that is continuing to drop. So I feel over time, this will be the cheapest resource we ever bought. It started as the most expensive. So we've been really, really pleased with the usage that we've seen. Angela and her team drive that. I think that's so important. If you're making an investment like that, it has to be front and center. It has to be something that your teams are talking about, that your teams are promoting. We all know that getting customers to use digital resources can be challenging. They don't always understand them. So your team really promoting this is what this can do for you makes all the difference.
All right, we're going to go ahead now and turn it over to Aaron O'Donovan, Special Collections Manager here in Local History and Genealogy, to talk about some of the other things we've been doing with newspapers. Oh, there was your question slide. There you go. Aaron O'Donovan.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of take it back to what we did before we had keyword searchable newspapers on NewsBank. And this actually started a year after I got here. 2012 was I got here in 2012, which was soon after the Columbus Bicentennial, and we started what is now called our My History collection. And very soon after that, our mayor at the time, Mayor Coleman, had a conversation with Pat Lesinski, our director, about how can we have more content about the Black community in Columbus. I think at first the mayor wanted a museum, and Pat's like, well, we don't have the money for that. But what can we do in our space, the library? We're not a museum. Our mission as a library is to have a thriving community where wisdom prevails. That's our etched in our building inside. And so basically, I thought about how can we get these older newspapers that have all of the Black community's history essentially in them. So what we did is used a very kind of old-fashioned way of doing that. We took our microfilm collections that we had. They're all in the public domain because they're all defunct and older newspapers, anywhere from the 1940s to the early 1970s. And the papers had gone under many, many years ago. So what we did was we just took our microfilm reels and put it on an automatic scanner using these old Minolta scanners that we have that are now 15 years old, and an automatic scanning feature. And what we did is basically found the edge, scanned every single thing that we had, and was doing it page by page. And then I just folded them up using a script, put them in there, and then we uploaded them in Content DM. And then we uploaded them as, if anyone's familiar with Content DM, or compound objects, which are just basically issue level records, and then we OCR'd them using the Abbey Fine Reader that's included with it. And we've had really great success with these. And the part of the project, the why we wanted to do this, is because so much of our Black history was in Black newspapers because mainstream newspapers were not covering this. So this is an example of an incident that happened in the 1940s. This person's accusing a policeman of police brutality in the early 1940s during a traffic stop. Again, not even covered in the dispatch. So I think about OCR, digitization of newspapers. We talk about DEI a lot at CML too. I feel like this is a very important thing to do for the DEI space. This is actually giving us equal and balanced coverage of what was happening at the time. So again, the kind of criteria we had, these papers were unique, they were scarce. I believe us and the Ohio History Center were the only people that had them on microfilm. They were inaccessible in the sense that you could get them on microfilm, but good luck finding your ancestor or any sort of news story that you might have heard of through your family. So this was just really important to us, and it was valuable to our local history and genealogy researchers because, again, Columbus has a really significant minority black population and immigrant population, especially in the early time period. So we were missing all of that with our traditional newspapers and traditional resources. So these were just frequently requested papers that people talked about all the time. Those were the Ohio State News, which was a 1940s paper. The Ohio Sentinel was a 50s and 60s paper, and we had the Columbus Challenger in the 1970s. And these are just some examples of what you might see. The paper here on the left is a opening of an old aged home in the Near East Side. That one in the center is of Jacob Ashburn running for state legislator, and then the person supporting him is a person named Robert Barkus, a lawyer in Columbus. And then the last one is Walter Lowry, who was a longtime Columbus police officer and detective. What we saw when we did this, we digitized about 1,000 issues of black newspapers, and I think we'd say we did it over maybe a course of a year or two to get all of them online. And to this day, we still see around 2,000 page views in our Black Heritage collection, which is not small for the amount of work that we put into it. We had gaps in our coverage. So we had especially a large missing gap in the civil rights era for our smaller newspapers and our black newspapers. So mid-1960s and 1990s, we were missing. We were also missing large photo collections. We sort of had, collections that were donated or loaned by our community. They were done kind of in piecemeal. Sometimes we got digital images. Sometimes we got photograph loans or photograph donations, but nothing of a large collection where we could get, a significant amount of material. So, and the other thing, we needed permission to digitize newspapers that were not in the public domain. So that was a really important part too to what happened next. So we ultimately, to fill these gaps that we had, we've been working on the Call and Post project, which was the most widely circulated black newspaper in Columbus from the 1960s to the 1990s. And it's been they gave the King Arts Complex in the Near East Side they've loaned their photo archive, which actually in some way is, I kind of prefer loans over donations, just for the sheer amount of work that go into donations. So what we've been doing with them is we've been taking their photo archive from the newspaper, processing them, putting them in folders, and then giving them back to them, and then scanning them as we go along and process them. So it's been working as a project because our permission concerns have been mitigated by working with former employees and family members of Amos Lynch, the former publisher. His nephew, who was basically co-editor of the Call and Post, is still around, and we talk to him frequently. Got his permission to do this, and then talked to Betty Stahl, who's the person who took in the donation from Amos Lynch before he passed away. So we've been working with that organization and getting them online. We currently have 5,000 photos online, and the time period is from 1962 to 1995. Currently, we only have through the mid-60s to the early 1970s currently, but we are currently trying to work on other grants to get that finalized and finished, scanned and online, and it's just a great collection. It's sort of so I think it's our second largest loan ever, I think. So, and that brings me to our current project that we're working on, and this was a project we were working on through the NHPRC and the Hidden Collections grant that we've been working on with the Internet Archive. We've been digitizing Columbus neighborhood newspapers all the way back from 1832 to 1993. So these are small neighborhood newspapers and small presses. The 1832 stuff is more Columbus citywide based material, but the neighborhood newspapers start around the 1920s in some communities and go all the way into the 1990s. Again, these are small presses that are no longer publishing, or they were in the public domain to begin with. And we were working from the microfilm that the Ohio History Center, Ohio History Connection we purchased the microfilm from them and digitized from that film. We sent the microfilm to the Internet Archive, which is processing them in Fort Wayne, Indiana, at the Genealogy Library there. And it's a large collection of local neighborhood newspapers. And the big collection that we had with that was the Column Post collection. And why this is important just to get this digitized is because it was the paper of record. And all of the photographs we had also had limited metadata on them. So what we're doing now is digitizing and OCRing these newspapers so they're keyword searchable, so we can go to an issue level and we can actually find out what these photographs are, which has been really helpful. We don't have a lot of unnamed or unidentified photographs, but when we do, we can go to this digitized microfilm and it helps us a lot, and it tells the complete story that we did not have before. So we're just looking to do, and I think in the future, do really that hyper-local stuff that we all love. I'm sure you all can understand that a lot of times in cities, I always tell you about hyper-local history because it seems people are very concerned with at their neighborhood level and maybe not so much at the city level. So the neighborhoods that are represented, just really quickly, South Side, the Hilltop, Bronzeville, Reynoldsburg, Linden, and then we also have other papers like labor newspapers, socialist newspapers, Underground Railroad newspapers like abolitionist papers that were actively, actually, surprisingly, talking about the work they were doing, which I thought was weird that they were just kind of saying they were doing it and they come and get us if you want to come and get us. So that was really enlightening to me because I always thought it was very secretive, and it was to a certain extent. They left out names and locations, but they were thumbing their noses definitely when they were doing this work. That's the Ohio Columbian, which is found to be really interesting. And then just other early black newspapers like The Torch and the Columbus Voice, which was run by an African-American woman in the 1930s named Florence Oakfield. So those are really interesting piece of history there, just to have these sort of unheard voices heard again, which is what we've been all about lately in local history and genealogy.
All right, I'm going to, for the interest of time, turn it over to Kristen Newby. We're going to shift gears here a little bit, and we're going to talk about the old stuff before we've digitized it. So Kristen's going to talk about our recent acquisition of the Columbus Dispatch photo archives.
All right, everybody, I'm going to bring us home. So back in June of 2023, of just last year, the library transferred about 750 boxes of materials from the Columbus Dispatch building. They were moving from their previous location to their new location where they are now, and lots of behind-the-scenes relationship building and trust building in the making. But, you know, we have the hard copies here at the library, which they gave to us. And so when they were moving buildings, they decided that they didn't really want to take their photo archive with them. And so we were kind of a natural place for them to give it to us. It took a lot of planning, a lot of shifting priorities, but we made it happen. So I'm going to focus on the photos in the collection, but we received lots of other things too, including hard copy newspapers, not of the Dispatch because we already have those, but of some smaller local newspapers that we didn't have in the collection already, and a few artifacts, including the straw poll box that you see here. When you came in, you walked by a large display case that has some items from the photo collection and some of the artifacts, including the straw poll box. So if you want to take a look on the way out, please do. And Angela mentioned kind of with the decline and consolidation of newspapers, you know, we all kind of are asking ourselves the question of what is the role of the public library in preserving these materials? And we've taken on that charge of being kind of the last resort repository. So if you aren't convinced with all of the things that everyone has talked about before that this is a worthwhile endeavor that you should consider taking on for your local community, hopefully seeing some of the images from the photo archive will help. So 2 of the major series in the photo archive collection are local people and national people, and we've primarily focused our digitization efforts so far on local people because we feel like they're probably the most significant series from a Columbus history perspective. In that regard, there's everything you can expect to find in a newspaper in that collection: photos of students who won school contests, sports teams, politicians. This photograph that you see here is William H. and Mary Adams Brooks with their son Billy. William was a lawyer and the first Black Franklin County Municipal Court judge. He also served as the Director of Public Utilities of Columbus and the Deputy of the Franklin County Auditor and Assistant Ohio Attorney General. There's also a lot of regular people in the photo collection doing regular everyday things. You see here Ahmed and Salwa Abdallah in their printing shop called Eastland Printing Center in about 1988. Ahmed was also the president of the Islamic Foundation here in Central Ohio. Of course, there's a fair share of famous people in the collection too, including Eddie Rickenbacker here on the right with his mother Lizzie at Union Station in Columbus upon returning from World War I. Rickenbacker was the famed fighter pilot deemed Ace of Aces for shooting down 26 enemy fighters, and his boyhood home is preserved here by the Rickenbacker Woods Foundation over on Livingston Avenue, which is right down the road from our Driving Park branch of the library. Some other famous Ohioans mark significant events in a broader American history context. This is a very young John Glenn here in 1962 visiting John F. Kennedy at the White House. By this time, Glenn was already a war hero who had earned 6 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 18 Air Medals. He was also the first person to fly a supersonic transcontinental flight across the U.S. This photo was taken shortly before he left his Upper Arlington home and became the first American to orbit the Earth. The Columbus civic and cultural organizations are well represented in this collection too. In the photo on the left, you see Rosetta Anderson playing the accordion at the Marion Franklin Lions Club for their 1977 White Cane Sales event. Rosetta was blind, and the Lions Club raised money for her to purchase artificial eyes, and so they had her come perform. And then on the right here, you might recognize the front porch of this building. You see library staff members getting ready for an exhibit of Milton Caniff's artwork. The photos in this collection also remind us of everyday life that have been forgotten. In this example, we're talking about the 1970s energy crisis, and Dakota bus drivers would check in for a sign in the window at Long and High Street or at stations on Cleveland Avenue. If it was hot enough or the humidity was high enough, there would be someone standing in the window holding up a sign with a big red dot on it that told them that they could turn the air conditioning on in the bus. So here you see Assistant Superintendent of Transportation Harold Millman is standing in the window with the red ball sign, so everyone can cool off a little bit. I can't imagine rolling up and the red dot isn't there and you're just like, oh, no. There are also lots of aerials of Columbus in the collection, including this one from 1924. In general, aerial photography can help us determine dates when buildings, roads, or other geographical features changed around the city. With this one, we know that it's from around 1924 because we see the construction of what would have been the third Neal House Hotel in the bottom left. We know the second Neal House was demolished in 1923 and the third opens in 1925, so that helped us date this one. That also checks out with the 1920s cars on the street and the small parking lot that was the site of City Hall, which burned down in 1921, and that's where the Ohio Theater is located now. Sometimes aerial photographs are important for what's missing. This July 14th, 1950 aerial view of Columbus looking south shows the State House towards the center, Central High School, which is now COSI there on the far right on the other side of the river. The Columbus Audubon below was the old warehouse for Lazarus at that time. And then the two main roads that you see out there on the left are 3rd and 4th Streets. And you're kind of looking south to South Columbus, German Village, Brewery District. So what's important about this photograph is what you don't see. The Levesque Tower is only one of our city's top 30 buildings to be built at this time. The freeways 70 and 71 haven't come through yet. The Federal Highway Act was passed in 1956, and highways started going in the early 60s. So photographs like these allow us to have conversations with customers about the impact of the highways, not just the destruction of neighborhoods, but also the impact of car culture on downtown. Between 1960 and 1990, we saw a number of buildings in this photo be destroyed due to make room for parking lots. So it's this kind of perspective that makes these photographs important to preserve for future generations. So all of the images that we're scanning are available on My History, which is our digital collection. The Columbus Metropolitan Library is the digital hub for Central Ohio. So in addition to all of the items that we've talked about, you'll find over 1.75 million images related to Columbus history. So it's really cool to see the archives of the Columbus Dispatch live among all of the other historical materials that we have so that they can be used as a supplement and complements to all of the other wonderful things in our collection and things that customers have loaned to us to put online. So as I hope you've all realized, this is such a wonderful gift for Columbus history, and I hope that you have a chance to look around, take a look at the displays that we have up by the info desk, and hopefully go on a tour.
Thank you all for coming today. Thank you one more time to NewsBank for hosting us. We couldn't have done this without you. So thanks, everyone.